On what seemed like a routine commercial flight, a brash, overconfident rookie couldn't resist mocking the quiet woman sitting by the window. Dressed in nothing more than ordinary clothes, with a calm and unreadable expression, she appeared to be just another passenger to him. He laughed at her silence, thinking she was timid, weak, or afraid of flying. Little did he know, his arrogance blinded him to the fact that she carried a lifetime of discipline, experience, and lethal skill behind that composed exterior. But when the plane suddenly faced a life-threatening emergency, the cabin filled with panic. The pilot's voice, cracking with urgency, rang out over the intercom. "Are there any combat pilots on board?" In that moment, the woman calmly raised her hand, revealing her credentials as a seasoned SEAL commander. Her confident posture, unshaken by chaos, left the rookie utterly stunned. He realized, too late, that he had underestimated someone far beyond his comprehension, a woman who could take control of the aircraft, protect everyone aboard, and turn a near disaster into survival. What exactly happened next as she assumed command? How did she manage the impossible? But before we dive deeper into her story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's understand how this story really began. The cabin of Flight 490 maintained its pressurization, but the air in row 12 carried a different way entirely, one measured in unspoken challenges and concealed assessments. Liam, barely 25, leaned into the aisle seat with the subtle aggression of someone who had spent his life performing for approval. His tactical cap was perched at a calculated tilt, shadowing eyes bright with unspent adrenaline, and his t-shirt screamed U.S. Navy SEAL in bold, unmissable lettering, a badge of identity that lacked any practical confirmation. The certificate in his wallet was scarcely dry, yet he exuded certainty as if the ink had forged decades of combat experience. His shoulders were broad, chest expanded, hands flexing unconsciously against the leather of the armrest, micro-movements betraying his need for domination over the space, over the perception of everyone around him. He sniffed once, shallow, chest rising sharply, then leaned closer to the woman beside him, his grin sharp and performative. Barbara, seated by the window, made no move to acknowledge him. Her hair, shot through with gray, was pulled into a precise bun, tight and severe. A beige cardigan draped over her frame, modest but purposeful, and her reading glasses caught the cabin lights at just the right angle to conceal the flicker of calculation in her eyes. She turned a page of her paperback with deliberate slowness, fingertips brushing the edges with controlled precision. Her face remained unreadable, no twitch of the lips, no narrowing of the eyes, no shiver of impatience. Each inhalation was even, measured, the faintest lift of her shoulders betraying a body accustomed to stillness under observation. "You realize you're hogging the armrest, right?" Liam's voice cut the murmur of the cabin. His knees pressed outward in a calculated man spread. "Some of us need the space. Muscle mass requires room. You wouldn't understand." His words were punctuated by the snap of his fingers against the armrest. Barbara's hand turned another page. She didn't blink. Her eyes remained locked on the text, yet a sliver of peripheral focus noted his posture, his agitation, the subtle twitch of his jaw, a novice trying to project dominance without the requisite gravitas. "Silent treatment, classic," Liam laughed, loud, scanning for corroboration from anyone within earshot. He craned his neck, eyebrows raised theatrically, chest puffing again. "I bet you're terrified of flying. Don't worry, sweetie. If anything happens, you're sitting next to a Tier 1 operator. I'll save you." Barbara finally lowered her glasses, revealing eyes like polished steel, cold and unyielding. They swept his t-shirt, registering the amateur hands, the softness under the knuckles, before locking onto his gaze. No panic flickered in her pupils, only the quiet assessment of boredom layered atop latent patience. Liam's grin faltered, reading another quit that never left his throat. At that moment, the Boeing 777 shuddered violently, the fuselage groaning in protest under an unanticipated stress load. The banking was abrupt, the wings flexing visibly through the thin cabin walls. Oxygen masks clattered to the floor in a mechanical rain. Screams erupted, harsh and chaotic, cutting through the hum of engines and the whine of pressurization. The intercom buzzed, not with the measured cadence of a captain, but with the tremor of fear edging a young flight attendant's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. Is there, oh God, is there anyone with flight experience on board?" Specifically military aviation? The captain is incapacitated. We need help immediately. Liam's hands closed on the armrests, knuckles whitening. The bravado that had filled the space moments before vaporized in the sweat forming at his temples, the hitch of his breath. Barbara, in contrast, allowed her book to fall closed with the subtle snap of authority. She unbuckled her seatbelt with fluid, practiced movements, a rhythm honed through years of operational discipline. As the plane pitched violently nose down, she rose from her seat, standing tall in the aisle. Gravity tugged at everyone else. She moved with a grounded stability, her posture unyielding, feet planted like oaks. She glanced down at Liam, whose wide eyes mirrored the cabin's collective panic, the sheen of sweat on his forehead catching the flicker of the reading lights. "Stay here, kid," she said, her voice slicing cleanly through the cacophony, an edge of command wrapped in calm. "Try not to throw up." Without hesitation, she strode toward the cockpit, each step measured against the shifting G-forces, arms steady, shoulders squared. The passengers around her clutched armrests and seatbacks, but Barbara moved through the aisle as though the chaos bent around her, not the other way around. The cockpit door shuddered under the frantic pressure of the situation. Sarah, the lead flight attendant, had planted herself like a sentry, her palms pressed against the cold metal, knuckles white, tears streaking down her cheeks and mingling with the sheen of sweat on her temples. Her voice trembled despite the volume, cracking with the effort to maintain authority over passengers and crew alike. The moment her eyes caught Barbara advancing through the aisle, framed in the beige cardigan, her composure faltered entirely. Her jaw tightened, lips parted in a silent plea. "Ma'am, please, sit down. We need a pilot, a professional," she implored, the words clipped and urgent, each syllable a frantic heartbeat in the chaos. Barbara's pace never slowed. The movement of her hand into her purse was fluid, deliberate, an extension of muscle memory developed over decades of operational protocol. Her fingers closed around the leather wallet with a tactile precision, pulling it free without breaking stride. The dot identification card gleamed under the overhead cabin lights, gold foil catching and reflecting in a disciplined, almost ceremonial display. "Commander Barbara Vance, United States Navy, Naval Aviator, open the door," she commanded. The inflection brooked no argument, a tone honed in environments where hesitation could cost lives. It wasn't a request. It was an operational order delivered with the unshakable authority of one accustomed to instant compliance. Sarah's eyes widened, pupils dilated, and her fingers moved with mechanical accuracy over the keypad, punching the code. The door released with a hiss that felt like a shutter snapping open to reveal a battlefield. Barbara stepped into a nightmare. The cockpit was a symphony of alarms, the master warnings blaring in jagged pulses. The terrain awareness and warning system screamed a persistent whoop-whoop as red stall indicators flared. The captain slumped over the center console, slack-jawed, pale, the pulse along his carotid barely perceptible and acute myocardial events suspected, though no time existed for formal diagnosis. The first officer, conscious yet paralyzed, displayed the classic signs of acute stress reaction: hyperventilation, wide-eyed fixation, tremor rippling down his forearms, and the vacant stare of dissociation locked on the spinning altimeter. The plane, a leviathan of 300 tons, twisted in a spiraling dive past 18,000 feet, the forces pressing against Barbara as though the cabin itself had become a centrifuge. She anchored herself into the left seat, shoulder straps biting into her torso, and hauled the unconscious captain back against the restraints. Her hands gripped the yoke with micro-adjustments, compensating for the hydraulic feedback and erratic control surfaces. The rudder pedals screamed resistance. The yoke fought against every correction, every ounce of authority she exerted on the machine. "Controls check," she muttered under her breath, the cadence precise, voice low and steady, heart rate maintained near baseline despite the acute stress of flight envelope exceedance. She stomped on the right rudder, countering the asymmetrical thrust and banking, her thigh muscles cold like springs to anchor the motion. She hauled back on the yoke with a deliberate, calculated force, feeling the metal and hydraulics respond through every tendon, every sinew, the wings quivering with structural protest. The cockpit door slammed open once more. Liam stumbled in, breath ragged, eyes wide with a cocktail of fear and ego-driven urgency. "Hey! You can't be in here. I'm a SEAL. I should be. Get out." Barbara's voice cut like a monofilament wire through the alarmed hum. She didn't look back. Her peripheral vision tracked his movement with practiced precision. The plane pitched again, gravity pressing at angles that threatened to dislodge anyone untrained. "You're going to kill us. Let the co-pilot fly." Liam barked, reaching for her shoulder in blind desperation. Barbara released one hand from the yoke, captured his wrist with surgical precision, and applied a joint lock honed in years of combatives. A quiet crack of compliance echoed as he collapsed to his knees, the cramped cockpit amplifying the impact. "If you touch me again, I will break your arm. Sit in the jump seat and shut up, now." Her voice carried the calm finality of operational authority. Liam, stunned by the raw dominance of the librarian, scrambled backward into the observer seat. His eyes flicked over the cockpit panel, scanning the red-illuminated warning lights, the glass displays, and the chaos rendered in neon readouts. Barbara's gaze swept the cockpit systematically, noting hydraulic pressures, engine differentials, and flap positions. "We've lost hydraulic system A and B," she stated flatly, her tone devoid of panic. "We are flying a brick." Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, calculated every vector, every potential response, already sequencing contingency procedures as the jet screamed through the atmosphere. The aircraft had finally stabilized at 12,000 feet, yet the fuselage continued to vibrate, with residual stresses, each metallic tremor transmitting through the seat frame into Barbara's spine. The cockpit, now eerily silent except for the hum of auxiliary systems, carried a weight far denser than the cacophony of alarms it ever imposed. The air smelled faintly of ozone and hydraulic fluid, sharp and clinical, a scent Barbara registered instinctively as she scanned the instruments. Her voice, calm and measured, cut across the radio waves with surgical precision. "Tan tan, pan pan, pan pan, flight 492, heavy. Pilot incapacitated, multiple system failures, requesting immediate vector to nearest hard deck, declaring an emergency." Each syllable carried the inflection of someone trained to prioritize clarity under maximum operational stress. The response from air traffic control was immediate, a practiced cadence of protocol overlaid with subtle urgency. "Flight 492, copy. Nearest strip, his Naval Air Station Oceana. Do you have visual?" Liam's head snapped toward the radio, pupils dilating. Oceana, the master jet base, home turf for naval aviation, where legends were forged in fire and discipline. His breath caught in the hollow of his throat, a micro-inhalation that betrayed both awe and fear. "Negative visual," Barbara replied with clipped efficiency, adjusting her headset to keep the left side ear cup tight against the vibration. "Instrument approach necessary. I have limited control authority. I need a clear lane. Clear the airspace." Her thumbs hovered over the mode control panel, scanning the HUD for terrain data, calculating glide slope adjustments and crosswind vectors. "Copy for 192. State your intentions and..." "Mom, state your qualification." Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. She slid the headset slightly, ensuring radio clarity. "Commander Vance, call sign Widowmaker. Current on F/A-18 Super Hornets and test qualified on heavy transport platforms." The words dropped into the cockpit like ordnance, precise and deliberate, each syllable steeped in authority born of operational credibility. Liam froze. The color drained from his face, veins whitening at the temples. Widowmaker, every midshipman and newly minted SEAL knew the myth, the first woman to lead the Black Aces squadron. The pilot who had landed a C-130 on a dirt road under mortar fire in Afghanistan to extract a pinned-down SEAL element, a ghost in the annals of naval aviation. And he had, minutes ago, been preening like a child, seeking recognition. Widowmaker, the ATC operator's tone shifted, formality giving way to awe. "Copy that, Commander. We are clearing the pattern. You had the ball." Barbara's gaze flicked to the first officer, still slumped in the right seat, hyperventilating, hands trembling over controls he had long ceased to manipulate. "'Tis useless," she muttered, the words cold, precise. Her eyes narrowed, scanning Liam with the Predator's focus she had honed through decades of high-stakes operations. "You, SEAL, do you know how to read a checklist?" Liam's mouth opened, then closed. I did some sim training in. I don't care about your video games." Barbara's hand moved to the red binder on the panel, flipping it open with a smooth motion. Grab the Q/H, the quick reference handbook. Page 12. Hydraulic failure. Read loud. His hands shook as he fumbled with the binder, paper edges crinkling under the strain. Sweat beaded at his brow, trickling into the line of his jaw, but Barbara didn't flinch. Her grip on the yoke was feather-like yet unyielding, micro-adjustments threading the aircraft along the fragile balance between control and freefall. She calculated every input, anticipating the rudder lag, compensating for hydraulic loss, reading the flight instruments with the precision of a chess master counting moves in advance. Her eyes, cold and analytical, scanned the right engine instrument cluster. Then the gauges told her what her instincts had predicted. The RPM needle faltered, the engine sputtered, and the right side thrust dropped to 0. The aircraft yawed subtly, the asymmetry demanding immediate counteraction. Barbara's jaw tightened, nostrils flaring imperceptibly, and her hands moved with unhesitating authority to cross-feed fuel and adjust trim tabs. The plane responded reluctantly, metals groaning in protest. The cockpit, for all its alarms and flashing reds, became a theater of disciplined calculation. Barbara's calm dominated the chaos, her presence a stabilizing force around which every variable mechanical, human, atmospheric was brought under control. Liam's hands continued to tremble over the Q/H, his reading forced, the words leaving his lips uneven, punctuated by staccato breaths. He was a novice, yet the silent acknowledgement of her authority began to etch itself into his psyche. The predator in his midst was no myth, but a living, calculating professional, and every microsecond of delay could tip the balance between survival and catastrophe. Engine failure, number 2, Barbara announced, her voice calm and deliberate, each word clipped with operational precision, as if dictating coffee orders in a boardroom rather than managing a 300-ton aircraft spiraling through the atmosphere. The Boeing yawed violently to the right, the dead engine acting like a fixed anchor, tugging the fuselage into an unrelenting roll. Every gauge in the cockpit screamed in protest. The yaw damper had no authority without hydraulic assist, and the artificial horizon rocked in tandem with the banking fuselage. Barbara slammed her left foot onto the rudder pedal, pressing against the resistance that felt set in concrete. The pedal refused to move fluidly, as though the mechanical system itself had joined the mutiny. Liam. Her voice cut through the low-frequency hell of air rushing past the fuselage, precise, urgent. I need muscle on the rudder pedals, get down there. What? His words were ragged, staccato, swallowed immediately by the roar of the cabin. My left leg isn't enough to hold this yaw against the dead engine without hydraulic assist. Get your hands on my knee and push. Put your back into it. She didn't wait for affirmation, already bracing herself, her gloved toes digging into the pedal bar. Liam unbuckled, knees scraping the floor panels, and squeezed into the footwell beside her. Sweat pricked his brow, dripping into the collar of his seal shirt. He pressed his shoulder into her thigh, arms straining as he followed her instruction with desperate determination. Every movement required micro-adjustments of balance, his feet sliding on the textured floor as the aircraft attempted to twist free of their control. Grunts escaped him involuntarily, his jaw tight, lips dry, eyes flicking repeatedly to the yaw indicator, then to Barbara's calm, unwavering face. Harder. Barbara gritted her teeth, the subtle flare of her nostrils the only visible signal of the acute load on her musculature. Her free hand flipped switches rapidly, rerouting fuel crossfeed, engaging manual override circuits in the hope of reviving the dead engine. The yoke in her other hand was heavy and uncooperative, yet her grip never faltered, fingers responding to subtle shifts in pitch and roll, as though the aircraft were an extension of her body. If we lose the nose, we spin. If we spin, we die, she murmured, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Every syllable reinforced command presence in the cockpit, her words slicing through Liam's panic and the machine's mechanical rebellion alike. For 20 minutes, Liam became a human servo motor, exerting every ounce of physical strength, chest and back muscles quivering under the unrelenting demand. Sweat plastered his shirt to his skin, his forearms trembling with the sustained effort. Barbara, at once predator and professional, piloted with surgical precision, adjusting rudder trim and thrust differentials while her gaze mapped glide slopes, drag coefficients, and control surface deflection with the mathematical clarity of a test pilot. Her eyes scanned altimeter trends and vertical speed indicators, already anticipating the landing approach under severely compromised systems. "You talked a big game back in row 12, she said, voice tight but controlled, her eyes never leaving the horizon visible through the cockpit windows. "Now earn your trident, Posh." Liam's exhaustion had stripped him of arrogance. The raw terror of mortality filled the space behind his eyes, manifesting in shallow, rapid breaths, jaw set, and the subtle tremor of fingers gripping her knee. He glimpsed her face, composed, analyzing each parameter with absolute focus. This was no grandmother. This was a predator operating within her element, eyes flicking between instruments, gauges, and the external environment with lethal precision. "Why didn't you say anything?" he gasped between exertions, voice ragged. When I was being a jerk." "Because," Barbara replied, voice even, eyes scanning the horizon and the glass displays, "a lion doesn't concern herself with the opinion of sheep. Now shut up and Posh." Suddenly, the cloud layer broke, a jagged seam in the sky revealing the vast gray expanse of the Atlantic below, churning in cold turbulence. Beyond it, the concrete runways of NAS Oceania glinted faintly in the sun's fractured light. Yet the aircraft was still too high, too fast, every system compromised, every input magnified by the loss of redundancy and the asymmetry of the dead engine. Barbara's hands, calloused and precise, gripped the yoke, nudging, trimming, coaxing the Leviathan toward a survivable approach, each micro-correction, a battle of physics against the unrelenting laws of momentum and gravity. Oceania Tower, flight for 9 to on final, single engine, manual reversion, gear is unsure, Barbara transmitted, her voice calm, clipped, each word measured with operational precision. Her hands moved instinctively across the panels, checking hydraulic pressures, confirming auxiliary pump activity, monitoring brake accumulator status. Every microsecond of delay could cascade into structural failure, and she knew it. She reached for the landing gear lever. Nothing, the mechanical resistance was absolute. No green lights illuminated the panel. The hydraulics, compromised from prior system failures, were insufficient to move the massive 777 landing assemblies. She exhaled slowly, a controlled release of pressure, and engaged the manual override sequence. Gravity alone would have to accomplish what hydraulics could not. "Manual extension failed," she reported, voice low but steady, eyes scanning the altimeter and airspeed indicators. Gravity drop attempting. Her fingers moved under the dash, tracing the hidden mechanical release. A firm pull produced a resonant clunk echoing through the floor panels. Two green lights came alive. Main gear down and locked. The nose gear remained red. Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. The cockpit instruments confirmed her assessment. They were moments away from landing a fully loaded 777 without nose wheel support. The aerodynamics would punish them mercilessly. At 160 knots, the friction between steel and asphalt, coupled with differential braking and aerodynamic drag, could ignite sparks, cause structural tearing, and initiate fire along the fuselage. Every calculation she made had to be precise. "Liam, get back in the jump seat." "Brace position," she ordered, her eyes cutting toward him with surgical clarity. He hesitated, chest heaving, sweat slicking his forehead, but he moved, shoulders scraping the overhead panel as he folded into the observer's seat. "What about you?" His voice cracked, revealing fear he had so far managed to suppress. "I'm going to hold the nose off the ground as long as possible, aerodynamic braking. When I yell evacuate, you open that door and get people out. Do you understand?" Her eyes locked on his, a command unyielding, leaving no room for negotiation. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered, jaw tight, knuckles blanching as he gripped the seat handle. "And Liam." Her tone sharpened, subtle but unmistakable. "Yes. If we survive this, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about respect." Barbara's right hand grazed the throttle, reducing power on the remaining engine, allowing airspeed to decay just enough to manage descent rate. The runway grew closer in the heads-up display, an unforgiving strip of concrete stretched beneath them. The ground proximity warning system screamed its mantra, "Pull up, pull up, pull up." The sound was deafening, vibrating through the metal frame and into their bones, yet Barbara ignored it. She had measured the clearance and calculated drag. Any deviation now could flip them onto their backs or cause a catastrophic nose strike. She cut the remaining engine. Silence filled the cockpit, a stark, oppressive absence after the previous cacophony of alarms and mechanical screams. The only sounds were the subtle rumble of airflow along the fuselage, the whine of hydraulic residuals, and the tactile vibrations under her feet and through the yoke. She monitored the attitude indicator with a hawk's precision, adjusting ailerons and spoilers with imperceptible microcorrections, coaxing the aircraft to remain balanced on its main gear. Barbara's jaw set as she calculated touchdown dynamics, speed reduction, weight transfer, and torque distribution between the main gear assemblies. Each fraction of an inch of nose elevation would determine whether the aircraft would skid smoothly or collapse under the brutal force of its own mass. Her eyes flicked repeatedly to Liam, who now mirrored her focus, adrenaline sharpening his senses, muscles cold in anticipation. The tarmac rushed up, a uniform gray blot against the Atlantic haze. Sparks would ignite almost immediately upon first friction between the nose fuselage and runway, but Barbara's calculations promised a controlled slide, minimizing structural compromise. Her glances at the engine instruments confirmed zero thrust on number 2, full-feathered propeller drag neutralized. The aircraft was a dead weight, yet she moved it with the finesse of someone intimately familiar with lethal machines. Every passenger in the cabin, though unaware of the intricate calculations unfolding in the cockpit, had their life effectively in Barbara's hands. Every heartbeat, every shallow breath, every subtle shift of weight could be fatal if misaligned with her judgment. She was quiet, calm, and methodical. The steel in her eyes reflected the runway ahead, unwavering in purpose. The main wheels of Flight for 9 slammed into the concrete with a violence that rattled the very bones of the fuselage. Smoke erupted from the tires, acrid and thick, curling upward as rubber protested the friction with speed far beyond ordinary limits. The sound was a feral chorus of screeching steel, tearing aluminum, and shuddering hydraulics, a symphony of controlled destruction that reverberated through every panel and strut of the 777. Barbara's hands gripped the yoke with iron resolve, her knuckles whitening as she pulled back, coaxing the nose upward in a precise wheelie. The aircraft responded reluctantly, the main gear absorbing the punishment as the nose hovered just above the asphalt, riding on the edge between survival and catastrophe. Speed bled off incrementally, 140 knots. 120, 100, every reduction brought them closer to stability, yet each decrease magnified the risk of the nose slamming down prematurely. The elevators, now at the extremes of their mechanical limits, lost effectiveness in the low-speed regime. Gravity, as relentless as ever, began to assert dominance over aerodynamic control. Barbara's jaw tightened. Her eyes scanned the instruments and the receding horizon, adjusting subtle inputs on the yoke with micro-corrections measured in fractions of degrees. Then, inevitably, the nose of the aircraft met the runway. The impact was brutal. A metallic screech, a tearing of aluminum, and sparks erupted from the forward fuselage, showering the cockpit windows in a blinding cascade. The vibration penetrated through the solace of Barbara's boots, traveled along the yoke into her forearms, and rattled Liam's teeth. He gritted them instinctively, muscles coiling, hands gripping the panel, as though sheer force could stabilize the aircraft. He thought it was tearing itself apart. Every rivet, every joint, every hydraulic line quivered under the assault. Barbara's hands and feet worked in a synchronized ballet of precision and raw power. Differential braking was applied with microsecond timing, subtly shifting weight and adjusting yaw to keep the aircraft centered on the strip. Her eyes, steely and unflinching, never left the horizon ahead. Every twitch of her lips, every subtle contraction in her jaw and brow, mirrored the judgment being passed between her and the aircraft, a conversation of survival. "Stay with me, she whispered, a mantra directed not at passengers, but at the machine itself, coaxing compliance from hundreds of tons of metal and hydraulics pushed beyond specification. The speed continued to drop. The friction finally won the battle. The 777, now scarred and smoking, ground itself to a halt. Smoke filled the cabin instantly, thick and pungent, clinging to hair, clothing, and lawns. Barbara's voice cut through it, authoritative and commanding, reverberating across the PA system. "Evacuate! Evacuate!" Liam reacted instantly, adrenaline finally translating into practiced skill. He blasted the cockpit door open, pushing the frozen flight attendant toward the slide. His commands rang out, sharp, concise, forcing passengers into trained obedience despite their terror. Sweat stunned his eyes, throat raw from shouting, but he moved with purpose, muscles remembering drills that had seemed distant and irrelevant until this moment. Barbara did not leave, not yet, her seatbelt unbuckled with methodical hands. She bent, her arms wrapping around the unconscious captain. Despite the weight 200 pounds of unresponsive body, she hoisted him into a fireman's carry as if he were a mere bundle of rags. Her face was impassive, controlled, no hesitation, no falter. The faint tremor of muscle in her arms was the only visible sign of exertion. Every step toward the door was measured, deliberate, calculated to maintain balance and protect the injured man while avoiding the still smoldering metal and potential hazards of the fuselage. The cabin, now a haze of smoke and panic, reflected the aftermath of her precision, discipline, and experience. The passengers could only stare, some sobbing, some frozen, as the woman in the beige cardigan moved with the efficiency of a seasoned combat operator, a quiet professional executing a rescue under conditions that would have broken lesser individuals. The emergency slides deploy with a hiss of compressed gas, unfurling like mechanical serpents against the acrid haze that clung to the tarmac. Fire trucks advanced methodically, foam spraying over the smoking nose of Flight 492, the chemical mist coating the fuselage in a slick sheen, the heat still radiating from metal stress to its limits. The chaos was orchestrated yet primal, a controlled pandemonium of sirens, shouting firefighters, and the frantic shouts of cabin crew shepherding passengers away from danger. Passengers clutched one another, faces streaked with soot and tears, phones held aloft recording the scene, trembling hands catching only fragments of light reflecting off smoke and metal. Each snapshot captured raw fear and relief intertwined, a testament to the narrow margin between catastrophe and survival. Liam, covered in a layer of fine black residue, stood by the wing. His chest heaved as he coughed, eyes watering from smoke inhalation. Adrenaline, once a steady drumbeat fueling his actions, was crashing now into exhaustion and residual terror. His gaze was fixed on the cockpit sly, every micromotion of the fuselage and twisted metal etched into his memory. Barbara slid down the chute with the precision of a practiced operator, still supporting the captain in a fireman's carry. Her movements were deliberate, almost surgical, conserving energy while maintaining control of the 200-pound frame. Medics intercepted her seamlessly, taking the captain into their arms and wheeling him toward the triage area. Barbara stood upright, the beige cardigan lightly dusted with soot, glasses adjusted with a simple, precise flick of her fingers. She looked almost absurdly ordinary, a civilian woman in sensible shoes, yet the faint flare of her nostrils and the rigid set of her shoulders betrayed the discipline and control honed over decades. The crowd, still forming a semicircle around the aircraft, parted instinctively as a black jeep approached, the gravel crunched beneath its tires. Admiral Holloway emerged, flanked by MPs in polished uniforms, their boots synchronized, every step purposeful. The Admiral's eyes locked on Barbara as he walked directly past the stunned passengers, past Liam, who remained rooted, jaw slack, watching the authority and respect converge on the woman who had just saved everyone's lives. "Commander Vance," the Admiral said, voice carrying the weight of decades of command. His salute was crisp, mechanical, but his gaze held genuine acknowledgement. "Hell of a landing. We thought you were a goner on the scope." Barbara returned the salute with a calm, practiced motion, one hand crisp at her temple, the other relaxed at her side. "Just a little stick and rudder work, Admiral. Sorry about your runway," she replied, her tone neutral, almost conversational, yet beneath it lay the steel of experience, the confidence of someone who had managed life-or-death variables dozens of times before. Liam's eyes flicked back and forth between the Admiral and Barbara, disbelief rendering him momentarily paralyzed. The two-star Admiral, a figure of ultimate authority on the base, had deferred not only acknowledgement but judgment to Barbara. It was a public affirmation for professional dominance, and Liam's internal narrative of competence and hierarchy fractured instantly. "We have a vehicle ready for you, Commander," the Admiral continued, voice firm but respectful. "And your new detail is waiting at the debrief center. I understand you're taking over as XO of the Special Warfare Development Group next week." Barbara nodded, the motion fluid, her eyes scanning the surrounding chaos with a detached awareness, cataloging every movement of personnel, the positioning of vehicles, and the condition of emergency crews. "That's the plan, although I might need a stiff drink first," she added, a faint exhalation betraying the briefest flicker of fatigue. Then her gaze found Liam, who had begun to step forward, unsure, hesitant, as if testing the boundaries of permission. Her eyes pinned him with surgical focus, assessing posture, breathing, micro-expressions. "Ensign," she barked, the single word cutting through the ambient noise like a steel blade. Liam flinched visibly, shoulders jerking, knees bending slightly in an involuntary act of obedience. He walked over, head hanging low, a silent confession of humility and recognition of authority. Every step was measured, controlled, yet weighted with the acknowledgement of prior arrogance laid bare. The tarmac had fallen into a brittle silence, broken only by the distant hiss of foam and the murmurs of emergency crews. Passengers instinctively drew back, their cameras and phones lowered, sensing a shift in the gravitational center of authority. The energy that once radiated from Barbara in the cockpit now radiated outward in palpable waves, commanding obedience without a word louder than necessary. Every eye on the tarmac seemed to measure the space between the 40-year-old woman in a soot-streaked cardigan and the young ensign who had just learned the raw weight of inexperience. Barbara's gaze settled on Liam, tracing the subtle tremor in his jaw, the almost imperceptible tick in his right eye that betrayed a spike in cortisol. She did not speak immediately. Instead, her lips pressed together, the faint exhalation of air through her nose barely audible. She calculated, evaluated, her mind parsing his posture, the angles of his shoulders, the positioning of his feet, micro-indicators of discipline and compliance or lack thereof. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but laced with authority that brooked no argument. "Stand at attention when you address a superior officer," she said, each syllable deliberate, measured, surgical. The words cut through the ambient noise like a scalpel through tissue. Liam's body reacted instantly. His heels snapped together in a crisp, military cadence, his spine straightening, shoulders squared. "Yes, ma'am, sorry, ma'am." The repetition was instinctive, automatic, yet his eyes betrayed lingering disbelief, the shock of humility setting in like lead in his chest. Barbara's gaze did not waver. She stepped closer, each footfall deliberate, reducing the physical space until she was almost pressing the heat of her body into his. "You told me back in row 12 that you were a SEAL, that you were Tier 1. Tell me, Ensign, what team are you assigned to?" Her voice was even, precise, but carried the weight of expectation, a verbal line drawn in sand that he had already crossed. "I just graduated buds, ma'am. Class 342, I'm en route to my first assignment at Little Creek." His words were clipped, hesitant, the staccato rhythm of someone attempting to reconcile rank, training, and raw terror. "Little Creek," Barbara mused, tilting her head, eyes narrowing slightly as she processed the data. "Team 4. "Yes, ma'am." His shoulders tightened, a barely perceptible inhale indicating both relief at correct acknowledgement and the awareness of being under microscopic evaluation. Barbara closed the gap further, her presence a calculated projection of command. "You wear the trident, but you have 0 combat drops. You disrespect civilians, you underestimate women, and when the pressure hit, you froze until I gave you a direct order." Her eyes drilled into his, unblinking, icy, assessing the response as much as delivering the critique. Liam's gaze dropped, tracing the darkened tarmac beneath his boots. His fists clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening, a physical manifestation of the internal storm. I panicked," he admitted, voice barely more than a whisper, weighted with the gravity of failure. Barbara's expression softened fractionally, only to harden immediately. "Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision," she said, quoting a principle drilled into every operator who had faced combat. She stepped back a fraction, letting the lesson land. "You have the physical tools, son. But your mind is weak, and your ego is dangerous. You are a liability." Her words hung in the air, each syllable deliberate, surgical, leaving an imprint as tangible as the acrid smoke still clinging to the air. The Admiral remained nearby, a silent sentinel. His 2-star insignia glinted in the sun, yet he said nothing, understanding instinctively that this was a teaching moment no observer should interrupt. He had watched many SEALs rise and fall, but he knew better than to interfere with Barbara Vance, the Widowmaker. "I saved your life today," Barbara continued, her voice steady, controlled, yet threaded with the weight of truth. but I'm not sure your career can be saved." She let the words hang, a verdict suspended between punishment and opportunity, a boundary set with clarity. Liam's chest rose and fell rapidly, the rush of residual adrenaline colliding with a dawning comprehension of the gulf between theoretical capability and the crucible of reality. Every passenger, every crew member who had remained within earshot, understood that this was not a rebuke, it was the precise calibration of authority, a field demonstration in accountability and consequence, a rare and brutal lesson in the nature of leadership, courage, and the quiet but absolute power of experience. Barbara's gaze locked on Liam, unflinching, unwavering, every line of her face a map of control, experience, and unspoken consequence. Her finger traced the air briefly before settling on the Admiral, who stood a few paces behind, his posture impeccably straight, insignia catching the light. "Admiral," she said, her voice steady, the calm precision of a trained operator masking the storm she had just navigated. "Pull this man's orders." Liam's head jerked upward, the movement sharp, reflexive, as if he had been struck by a bolt of reality. His brown eyes widened, pupils dilating with shock and disbelief. "Ma'am." The single word barely left his throat, hoarse and trembling. His jaw flexed involuntarily, a subtle micro-expression betraying the adrenaline still coursing through him. "You heard me," Barbara continued, her tone slicing through the residual hum of fire trucks and distant emergency sirens. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. The quiet authority in her command filled the space. "You are not going to Team 4. You are not ready for the teams. You are dangerous to yourself and your platoon." The words hit him like a kinetic force. His fists clenched at his sides, the sinews of his forearms tight, knuckles whitening. His breathing quickened, shallow and uneven, chest rising in short, rapid bursts. "Please, Commander," he stammered, voice cracking, eyes glistening with tears he barely tried to conceal. "It's my whole life. I worked 3 years for this." Barbara didn't flinch. She stepped closer, the faint scent of smoke still clinging to her beige cardigan, the slight sheen of sweat on her temple reflecting the sun's harsh glare. She spoke each word with surgical precision, the cadence of a professional trained to administer both judgment and instruction without hesitation. "And you threw it away in 3 minutes of arrogance." Her hand moved with calculated grace, retrieving a slim black pen from her pocket. The motion was fluid, economical, practiced. She grabbed the front of Liam's pristine, soot-stained tactical shirt, the material pulled tight over his chest as he instinctively stiffened and began to write on the white letters of SEAL. Each stroke of the pen was deliberate, the ink cutting into the stark surface like an incision, a lifeline encoded in precise numerals. "However," Barbara continued, her voice lowering just slightly, carrying a hint of acknowledgement that did not compromise authority, "I saw you in that cockpit. You took orders, you held that rudder when your muscles were tearing. You didn't quit." Her eyes met his briefly, and for the first time in the exchange, a flicker of recognition passed a quiet acknowledgement that potential existed, tempered by reality. She capped the pen with a sharp click. "I'm pulling your orders to the teams," she said, her cadence deliberate, allowing the weight of each word to settle into his consciousness. "You're being reassigned to the SEER School as an instructor's assistant. You're going to spend the next 2 years teaching pilots how to survive when they crash. You're going to learn humility. You're going to learn that the pilot, the taxi driver, as you boys call us, is the only reason you get to the fight." Liam's shoulders slumped, a subtle release of tension that spoke volumes about the collision between expectation and reality. His eyes, previously wide with protest, now shimmered with the raw, unfiltered recognition of consequence. It was a demotion, yes, but threaded within it was a lifeline, a chance at redemption. He swallowed hard, jaw working against the lump forming in his throat, the weight of years of ambition, suddenly reframed by 2 minutes of survival. Barbara's gaze remained unyielding, a tether of authority anchoring him. "If, and only if, you get a letter of recommendation from the Master Chief there in 2 years, you can reapply to the teams. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Liam whispered, voice tight, the single affirmation a tentative bridge between failure and the path to reclamation. He exhaled slowly, muscles loosening incrementally, yet his mind raced, replaying every movement in the cockpit, every command she had given, every measure of discipline he had failed to observe, and now, every opportunity he had been granted to redeem himself. Barbara's eyes swept the tarmac, scanning the crowd, the aircraft, the emergency cruise, and finally rested briefly on the Admiral. Her stance, still unyielding, conveyed both completion and closure. The lesson was delivered. To judgment executed, the door to future possibility remained open, but only for those willing to earn it through rigor, humility, and unflinching respect for authority and life itself. "Yes, Commander. Thank you, Commander," Liam whispered, the words barely audible over the distant hiss of cooling engines and the residual roar of fire suppression systems. His voice quavered, low and tight, threaded with a vulnerability he had never allowed himself to feel before. His shoulders slumped, arms hanging at his sides, wrists flexing subtly as if to shake off the lingering tension that had gripped his body since takeoff. The harsh glare of the midday sun reflected off the tarmac, catching the sweat beading along his hairline, highlighting the raw, human aftermath of survival. "Get out of my sight, Ensign," Barbara said, dismissive yet deliberate. Her voice was calm, carrying the authority of decades in command, and yet it held the faintest undertone of finality. It wasn't anger, it was control, the precision of someone who knew exactly how much to push and when to release. Liam obeyed instantly, each step away from her a combination of relief and shame, the scratch of his boots against the concrete echoing in the stillness left by the aircraft's catastrophic landing. As he walked, Liam stripped off the tactical shirt emblazoned with the SEAL insignia, peeling it away like a second skin that had become a mark of hubris. The fabric slipped from his shoulders, carrying with it the weight of unearned confidence. He balled it in his fists, fingers tightening around the soft cotton, knuckles white from both guilt and exertion. His jaw clenched, eyes staring at the ground, unable to look at Barbara even indirectly, yet committing the image of her stoic, unyielding, precise to memory. Every micro-expression she had displayed in the cockpit, the subtle shift of her eyes, the imperceptible tick at the corner of her mouth, uncalculating drag, the controlled exhalation, as she adjusted for turbulence was etched into his mind. Barbara turned back toward the Admiral, her gaze steady, scanning him as if appraising a field of officers she had known for decades. There was no warmth, no indulgence, only evaluation. "Soft spot for strays, Barb?" the Admiral asked, his two-star insignia catching sunlight, voice carrying the familiar mix of respect and humor only shared between men who had spent years navigating command. She allowed a shadow of a smile, just enough to soften the edges of her otherwise unyielding demeanor. "He's got good raw strength," she said, shrugging almost imperceptibly, eyes following Liam's retreating form. The rookie's frame was awkward under the sun, shoulders bowed, yet there was potential there, a kernel of something valuable hidden beneath arrogance and immaturity. Her gaze lingered a moment longer, calculating the balance between raw talent and dangerous ego. "He just needs to learn that the quietest person in the room is usually the one with the highest body count," she added, a statement as much tactical as it was philosophical, her tone casual yet loaded with the weight of battlefield experience. She bent down, retrieved her purse from the wreckage with deliberate care, and removed the paperback book she had been reading earlier. Dust motes rose in the sunlight as she brushed off the cover with precise movements, turning each page with practiced fingers before closing it again. Even amidst the chaos of a crashed airliner, emergency cruise, and gawking passengers, Barbara maintained the posture of someone completely at ease in her own domain. "Can someone get me a rental car?" she asked, voice carrying across the scorched tarmac, a hint of dry humor in the midst of unbroken professionalism. "I hate flying commercial." The black SUV was waiting. Doors open, engine humming softly. Barbara walked toward it without hesitation, adjusting her beige cardigan, checking her watch, posture perfectly aligned with the measured cadence of a soldier accustomed to command. The passengers still clustered near the emergency slides, still trembling, broke into applause. Some captured the scene on their phones, but she gave no acknowledgement, no wave, no nod. She simply stepped into the tinted vehicle, closing the door behind her with the finality of someone who had already completed the mission, both in the air and on the ground. Liam remained rooted to the spot, clutching the tactical shirt with Barbara's pen scrawled across the fabric. The ink, black and bold, felt heavier than any metal he had imagined earning. He pressed it to his chest, the paper of the shirt crumpling slightly under his grip. His breathing slowed, deep, reflective, each inhalation and exhalation a metronome to the lesson seared into his mind. He had seen the most dangerous woman on earth up close and survived unharmed physically, but irrevocably altered mentally. To tarmac, the burning smell of scorched rubber, the distant wail of sirens, they all blurred around the singular memory of her calm, controlled presence. As the SUV pulled away, Barbara a silhouette against the darkened windows, Liam felt the weight of experience settle into him. The lesson of humility, discipline, and respect for those whose skills ensured life or death had been delivered with the quiet precision of a Navy SEAL. He had met the ghost of legend and lived to tell the tale. The tarmac fell silent, save for the distant whine of fire trucks powering down, leaving behind an imprint that would not fade. If you enjoyed this story of courage, skill, and the quiet heroism of Commander Barbara Vance, make sure to subscribe to the channel to catch every edge of your seat mission, tactical rescue, and unflinching test of valor.